Welcome everyone to this panel's discussion. Workforce transition, shifting realities and expectations. Our topic comes at a very interesting time with major shifts within the dynamics of the workforce in the oil and gas industry. Just to give you a few statistics and thoughts, by 2020, Millennials will be 75% of our world workforce. Denver remains one of the top 10 cities for millennial migration, many of them coming from major metropolitan cities on the East and West Coast. And when it comes to the future of our workforce, we are constantly told that automation is destined to eliminate large swaths of our workforce. But the reality is definitely more complex and more optimistic. And we can't talk about oil's future without addressing the ever-evolving automation of technology and its impact on our workforce. For this panel discussion, we hope to give you insights on how, as an industry, we are evolving to meet the needs of our most valuable asset, our people. I am joined here on stage this afternoon with an industry professionals and on this topic, and I would like to first announce Elizabeth Garner. Elizabeth is state demographer with Colorado Department of Local Affairs. Elizabeth has over 25 years of experience analyzing population and economic trends in the state. She's an economist by training and a proud Denver native. We also have Keely Van Cleve, co-founder of Iridium Staffing, an energy-focused recruiting firm. She has more than a decade of experience finding talent within the oil and gas industry. And then we have Rich Frommer, who is president and CEO of Great Western Petroleum. Rich has over 35 years of experience in the industry. He is a professional geologist, and he is chairman of the board of the Colorado Oil and Gas Association. As a reminder, we would be delighted to have all of you participate in our panel discussion. I encourage you all to write down any questions you may have, raise your hand, and a member will be by to pick up your card, and we will hopefully be able to address your questions. With that said, I'd love to turn it over to Elizabeth Garner.
Great. Thank you guys very much for having me be part of this session. I'm going to talk about some of the big trends basically impacting the state and really how that's going to impact the labor force that you might be looking for into the future. So whether you believe it or not, Colorado is growing but at a slowing rate. And same within the United States as a whole. The US had actually its slowest growth rate last year at a 0.6 annual average growth rate than it had previously into the Great Recession or the Depression in the 1930s. So we've seen this slowdown. And so what does this slowdown in population growth mean to you guys? Well, part of this slowdown has to do with the fact that we've got an increasing number of deaths in the country, and that's just due to age. It's nothing weird. And then we've also got this shrinking number of births. Our peak births in the United States was in 1957. Oh. So the baby boom, any baby boomers out there, anybody gonna take that number, 1957? Oh, we've got a couple hands, yes. Even the peak year that millennials were born in the year 1990 was 200,000 fewer births than we had with the peak boomers in 1957. So what does that mean? We've got a lot of folks that are going to be aging out of the labor force and fewer people aging in. And so that's why we're going to be talking about this, is how do you guys then strategically look at attracting and retaining a different labor force? So when we look at total population growth for Colorado, one piece is this net migration, so bringing people in, and the other piece is natural increase, the births minus deaths. Fortunately for Colorado, we have been able to migrate people to the state. But how many times do we have challenges or where people say, oh, those migrants, we don't want any more migrants, right? How often, how many of you are not native Coloradoans? All right, so we are cursing our friends under our breath saying, oh, well, where'd you come from? Or why'd you come here? But the point is we need migrants. We get about 50,000 migrants a year to the state, and then the other piece about 30,000 in natural increase. Where do those migrants come from? Primarily from California, Texas, Florida, Arizona, Illinois. Those are our largest donor states. And so it's important to think about how do we continue to market Colorado to these other places? Well, we've been fortunate that we've been lower cost than both the coasts, but certainly Texas is a lot less expensive to live in than Colorado. And so that's where we've got some challenges is how do we compete for the best and the brightest when Colorado's costs are now more and more expensive. We know that job growth is highly correlated to migration. So the faster the job growth, the more migrants we get. And it's typically just a gap. We're looking at filling those gaps in terms of training. But if we know that it's going to get tighter and tighter in that labor force, because this is happening across the United States, what do we start needing to look at? It's how do we actually prepare our own to be able to fill those gaps and not always have to depend on being able to migrate people here. So it's important to think about educational attainment, and not only for some people, but for all people. The fastest growth in our entrance to the labor force are people of color. And my question to you guys is how often are you marketing entering the oil and gas industry to middle schoolers and high schoolers of a diverse background? Because that's when you need to get them. If you wait until high school, anybody have a high school student? They have lost their minds, right? So you need to get them in middle school, get them excited about your industry, and then make sure that they're taking the right classes when they're in high school. And it doesn't matter, I mean, attract and retain everyone, and then especially women. Even though we've seen transitions in the oil and gas industry, it's 81% of the industry is made up of men. We need to make sure that it's also an industry that is highly represented and can attract and retain women as well. So I think with that, I'm going to end my comments and see what else
Thank you very much. Kaylee?
Hi. Whoa, I'm really loud. I apologize. Well, I don't get to kind of look on the same kind of state level that Elizabeth does, but I kind of feel more in the trenches. So my goal on a daily basis is working directly with the companies and the employers here in our state and competing with employers across the board, across the United States, not only in oil and gas and finding and retaining that talent, but also outside of the oil and gas industry and trying to get them to kind of see us as a great place for them to build their careers. And so I definitely feel that from my kind of experience. So my background is I come from a fourth generation oil and gas family. My grandfather was a drilling engineer, company man with Marathon, worked his entire career for the same company. My father was a landman for only 2 companies. And so that type of history and how we developed our careers in the industry no longer exists. And so I find myself working with energy professionals here in the space on a daily basis, trying to navigate this new changing dynamic in the industry with shorter spacing between kind of downturns, changes in skill sets, changes in location and regions on their effectiveness to kind of pin the market down, whether that's from oil pricing or gas pricing, CapEx budgets, things along those lines. So I'm excited to kind of talk through some of the workforce changes that I'm seeing from my perspective. So,
Thank you, Kaylee. Rich?
Well, hello, everybody, and thank you for coming. As chairman, I appreciate all the efforts that the COGA staff has put into this event and our chairman and organizers of this event. It's well run, and really impressed to see you all here. It's been an interesting year to be our COGA chairman. Interesting and an honor to have been the chairman this year. We've had a number of challenges that you've heard about today, but it just reinforces to me the importance of the trade association and how important it is for us to show solidarity as an industry. And I think we've performed pretty well under some of the challenges that we've had this year. Great Western Oil and Gas. It's a family-owned business. Colorado-born, Colorado-built. We operate exclusively in the upstream space in Weld and Adams County. We employ about 150 professionals between our field office in Longmont and our headquarters in Denver. And in spite of all those challenges, Great Western is still in a growth phase. It's a moderate growth phase, but we're still growing, and we're looking forward to having this panel discuss some of the changes that we as an employer of professionals, the challenges we deal with every day in a changing environment.
Thank you, Rich. I really appreciate it. I think one thing that always I have found is looking back is always a great way to help us move forward. And so, Elizabeth, I'd like to ask you, with what you have given us on the decline in our workforce due to aging and a lower number of adults, young adults entering the workforce, what does history tell you about in the past? Have we in any other generation, whether it was in the pre-World War II or after World War II or during the 60s, that we had a decline in workforce? And what did we learn from that?
I wish we could say that this has happened before, but it hasn't, because the baby boom was known as the baby boom, and we have been reaping the benefits of the baby boom for the last 40 years. I mean, they have been the largest share and most active part of our labor force, since the 70s and 80s. And it's right now that we're just first seeing this transition out. And it was such a large group of folks to begin with, and now starting to age out is really important to look at. And into the future, there's going to be fewer and fewer aging in. And so we've really never seen this anywhere before in the United States, let alone any other specific state. But I think with it, we see a lot of benefits. One end is we also are seeing people stay in the labor force much longer. Instead of a lot of people aging out early, a lot of people are staying into the labor force much longer. And I think we need to really look at those opportunities of that side, of allowing people and helping people stay in the labor force longer. Some of that might mean some retraining, some of that might mean a little bit more flexible schedules to accommodate maybe some other issues, but really being able to keep that older labor force. At the same time, we've seen a slowdown in entrance into the labor force. A lot of it is because a lot more people are participating in higher ed. But there's no reason we can't combine both higher ed and work experience more actively to where they're getting real life, real experience. And so, when you've got this declining labor force participation, the only thing that you can do is, how can I bolster that up? How can I pick it up? And it's picking it up at both ends of the spectrum, both the older population as well as the younger population.
So with that in mind, and we'll get further into the multi-generational challenges that executives like Rich are involved in on a daily basis. But Kaylee, can you address for us specifically what you advise a more seasoned work professional in the oil and gas industry as far as his or her longevity in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, it's a common conversation point. I mean, we all have heard the great crew change conversations over the years, and we're living through it right now. I think, unfortunately, you do see the kind of more experienced labor force being some of the first cuts and layoffs. And so what they're needing to do in that type of environment is maybe consider a different approach. Their approach needs to be more from a mentorship, consulting, guidance, bringing that expertise that they've had in real-world experiences in drilling and engineering and geoscience, accounting and finance, operations, bringing that back to employers like Rich, and maybe in a different structure, like you had mentioned, Elizabeth, with a little bit more flexible schedule. So helping train the younger generations that are in the workforce and giving them that real world knowledge that they can layer in for future growth. So it's a great way for to kind of handle that dynamic a little bit. I mean, I think that would be my main kind of guidance on it.
Or you could be like I hire a 22-year-old to help program my iPhone.
Correct. It's a mentorship from both sides.
It's
It definitely.
an intern program, learning how to help me with my iPhone. So, Rich, let's jump over to you. We've got multi-generational workforce. I'm sure we mentioned on our call that the average age is 47, but yet we've got a large group of, more junior entry-level individuals and really have to adapt. Can you share with us some of the examples of what Great Western has done to help meld that generational gap between your more senior management team and more junior entry-level individuals?
Yeah, obviously, our workforce is 54% millennials. So we've got, a unique time. This is probably the first time in our history where we have 4 different generations of people working in the same offices. So it's been interesting to manage that range of expertise. And as we continue to bring newer people in, we're trying to make sure that they have a mentor and that we encourage that mentorship. We also kind of build them around getting alignment under our corporate values, because the corporate values that we operate under can get everybody aligned for the same thing. Ours are stewardship, teamwork, excellence, people, and growth, and those values tend to keep everybody aligned.
Thank you. Okay, Elizabeth, you mentioned how we are now having a larger migration into our state of racially and ethnically diverse individuals. Can you share with us how that is affecting the employment market here in Colorado? And what employers in particular do you see that they have it migrate towards? Is there anything you can put color to on that topic as far as our migration? And what's driving that?
Right. So big picture, the whole U.S. is a lot more racially and ethnically diverse at the youngest ages. So if we look just in Colorado, the population under 24 is 43% people of color. Mm-hmm. If you look at the population over 65, it's about 10% people of color. So we've got this very young, dominated people of color population. And it's across the board, across the United States. Colorado is a little bit less diverse than the US average. And so they're both migrating in and they're also here. And so I think what's important to realize is that in our educational system, we need to make sure that we are providing educational services across all race ethnic groups equally. But unfortunately, that's not the case, because we can look at achievement levels and see there's about a 35-point differential in educational attainment by race and ethnicity between white, non-Hispanic, and Hispanic. Colorado's got the second worst ratio, or second largest gap between the two, which is odd thinking about Colorado, that we've got this really large gap. So we've got to do a lot of work on our own to make sure that all of our young people have that educational attainment to make it in different careers in Colorado. But then I think that we all need to be looking at hiring practices, training practices, with a diversity and inclusionary lens. and making sure that we are looking at those issues with, a full spectrum view and how we're hiring people to make sure that people feel comfortable and good working in different industries. It's very interesting. The financial services industry has been very proactive in terms of trying to attract and retain, especially Hispanic population in that industry, because they have struggled to find enough workers. And sometimes it's just being able to see a mirror of yourself in the system. So it's making sure that you're hiring diverse, making sure that then those folks that are diverse are actually out there trying to recruit. Because that way you'll see, I think, a little bit more welcoming view of people coming into different industries.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, I have $1 million question for Kaylee.
Oh, no. No pressure.
What do millennials think about the oil and gas industry? And how has that impacted recruiting talent?
I don't know that they think about the oil and gas industry. I mean, to be quite honest. I mean, okay, so show of hands. When you first came into this industry, was it your top choice? Who in the room had it as their top choice coming into the industry? Okay. That dynamic is no longer out there. I mean, we're competing for talent in a pool of employers out there and in other industries that are a lot louder than we are. They're really good at messaging the values that they provide to new workforce. And I think that millennials tend to think of us being outdated, when in reality, a lot of the things that they are looking for, such as, having some kind of pride and value in what they do on a daily basis, having access to new technology, being on the leading front of something, working in a collaborative environment in a diverse community, working on big, hairy, audacious goals. Those are all things that happen in our industry, but we don't really talk about them. I think we need to do a better job of messaging it back to millennials so that way they can, and that's not just millennials. I mean, I am one, but we need to realize that our workforce moving forward will continue to see this multi-generational gap. And so we need to be good ambassadors, not only on a company level, but on an individual level, so that you can kind of talk through those cool projects you're working on and how it has really cool technology that we're deploying, how we are kind of on the leading edge on environmental practices. If they have problems with oil and gas from an environmental perspective, say, hey, come on, help us improve. Come join the cause instead of having commentary and not being engaged. So I think it's getting better at engaging the people and communities that we live in on the front end. Sorry, that's a long-winded answer there for you.
I appreciate it. So I'm going to flip the coin over. And a LaSalle network discovered that 76% of millennial employees are open to new opportunities. So that's 3/4 of the workforce. Why are they open and what are they looking for? That is a statistically very high number, and I was surprised to find.
Great question. I think everybody's open to opportunities, but I also work as a recruiter, so I feel like that. So maybe my world is showing me a little bit of a different lens than others. I mean, Rich might have a different kind of take on that. I actually don't find that off-putting. I think one of the big areas that allow or have millennials keeping the door open is they're used to options. Everything in kind of their world gives them options, right? In today's life, it's their world of their job employment is a very limited workforce. So they get to have a pick on where they spend their time, where they commit their careers to. And so I think that's probably what you're seeing on that front heavily. And also growth. I mean, they define growth. The traditional growth trajectories don't happen in the company the same way they used to. So for them, growth is defined differently. It's growth in ability to, take on new projects, try different skill sets on, learn about something new and different on a daily basis and challenge. And so sometimes they might not see that in their current organization, so they will look outside of the company that they're working for to try to achieve it.
Thank you, Kelly. Okay, so Rich, I want to hear what you, as an executive that spends and invests huge sums of money into your workforce, and attracting them, retaining them, to realize that that could be a high turnover. What do you suggest? What have you found that has potential to retain the kind of workforce that you're hoping to achieve at Great Western?
Well, I think this younger workforce is really not all that different than the older generations. You know, they're not lazy. They look at things differently. They're entrepreneurial. They're innovative. You know, I mean, and when they get a chance to be exposed to our industry, most of them are amazed at the level of technology. We are tech companies. I mean, I think about what we do every day. We're drilling 8-inch holes in the ground, but we're drilling them down 1.5 miles. We're turning them horizontal, and we're drilling for 2 to 3 miles in a zone that's no bigger than 20 feet thick. So keeping that drill bit there, it takes an amazing amount of information and skill, and it happens so fast. We're drilling these wells in 6 to 10 days. They have to be on top of things 24/7. So on our geologist side that used to be out in the field doing things, now they're in front of a computer screen 24/7 steering that drill bit. It's pretty mind-blowing technology when you think about it, right? And really to keep them engaged, it's, you know, they grew up. It's not like getting online is something new. These kids were always online. They've been online since the day they were born. And they're so used to finding answers. You know, every answer was just one Google search away. So they're constantly educating themselves. They're constantly finding, hey, what's the answer to that? Well, let me check it out. So they're very innovative and always are looking for solutions. So we just created an environment where we don't focus on the process, we focus on the result. And let's try to strive towards how do we achieve that result. And you'd be surprised the ideas that come up that get us there, right? And you know, the lieutenant colonel said people's our most valuable asset. At Great Western, we truly believe that. We believe that there's some member of our team that has just the right idea that could be translated into millions of dollars of value for our shareholders and our corporation. We just have to create that environment that allows them the chance to innovate.
So that's really a critical word, engagement, right? So it's been proven over and over again that engagement is critical to business success. And when executive teams are engaged, managers are engaged, and employees feel engaged. Rich, from an executive, can you give us a specific example of what you do on a daily basis or weekly to make your team feel like you're engaged? Is it walking management? Is it an email? Is it town hall meeting? Something that would help enlighten the rest of us that might be looking to find new ways to engage.
So believe it or not, you know, these younger members, they're always on their cell phones and they're always communicating on social networks. But this was also the generation that grew up where they all got trophies just for showing up. And that kind of feedback is very important. So the way I manage, my door is always open, and I am a walk-around manager. So I think they really appreciate not an email from me, but a face-to-face communication. And I strive to try to do that as frequently as possible.
And do you push that down to your managers as well?
Absolutely.
Because I think that is really one of a generational challenge between the gray hairs and the cell phones.
Yeah, well, you know, one of the changes also at Great Western, you know, I heard Elizabeth's demographics, but at Great Western, we're about 2/3, 1/3 women to men. But in my managerial staff, it's 60-40. So we find that the diversity adds to a greater interaction amongst my managers. And I think that's worked out to be pretty positive for Great Western.
Okay.
Translates to a lower turnover rate.
I have a question for you. So one of the things that I see quite a bit when people want to kind of make moves and changes, it tends to stem from not only the communication aspect of it, but also the fact that they are not being able to participate in cross-functional teams. How do you handle that? Is it different at Great Western versus like some of the other kind of larger organizations that you find yourself in a silo? And you might only ever see the component in your one silo, and that's where the stifling, I think, kind of happens with this multi-generational and dimensional workforce that we are now asking to participate on a daily basis.
I think you're absolutely right, and we intentionally have an organizational structure that does not, I mean, they have functional departments, but they also function as teams. And I think that team concept is what works better, to have a landman and an accountant working together, or a geologist and an IT person. That we have multifunctional teams, and that's the structure that we've created at Great Western that really, I think, is translated to our lower turnover rate.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'm going to go back up 30,000 feet. I'm going to swing back to Elizabeth. Okay? So, a number of your statistics pointed out that people migrate here, or migrate to any city for that matter, for jobs, right? The oil and gas industry is one of the highest paying jobs. In fact, it is the highest paying job in Colorado. It was the fastest growing industry in 2018, up by 11%. But we may see a slowdown in that. But what I want to dig into is wages. So can you tell us what factors beyond wages attract the migration rate into the state of Colorado? Is that the driver that we all need to make sure that they're compensated fairly? Can you give us more color to that?
Certainly, I think wages is probably at the top of most people's list. That will be the big piece that attracts. Now, certainly Colorado is, when you've got outdoor recreational opportunities and you have the opportunity to do a lot of different things, and you've got big city and you've got small town, that diversity does attract a lot of people. We've been like I said, very, very fortunate over decades. We've been able to attract people here, and a lot of it has been our outdoor recreation industries as a secondary thing that people can do. But people are also looking for community, friends, affordable housing, affordable daycare, and that's where I think we've got some challenges.
And I was going to ask, we have a skyrocketing cost of living in Colorado, housing leading the way. So will the continued cost of housing drive a migration rate out of our state?
So I think Colorado's got to be careful. We've been very, very fortunate that we've been able to attract and retain. We've had affordable housing over time, but we are at this point where, we definitely grew faster than we had housing units developed, and so that's put this pressure on housing price. It's affordable if you're coming from the coast, and that's what we've been attracting, folks from both coasts. But we've got the fifth highest median home value in the US, and that's ridiculous. And we've got to do a better job at creating more housing opportunities at all levels, whether it's at the high end, medium, low end, but definitely at the lower end, and looking at it strategically, making sure that it's placed in the right places, in the same, the right type of communities. We've got to just make it easier to work on housing, as well as not just the housing, but getting people from point A to point B, and that's got to be part of the answers as well, wherever we are. But we'll lose people, and we have been losing people, and I think you brought up automation at the very beginning. And I think that is what we're going to see happen, is that if we cannot attract and retain the best and the brightest, or the right fit for the right job, is that we will see more automation come in. And I think we'll see it regardless, but I think definitely where we've got this tight labor force and people not being able to move here.
So, Kaylee, do you find that is a a challenge in recruiting talent to come to our state with the cost of living, of course, from Houston or Midland. But how have you seen an impact to our state in hiring because of the cost of living?
I think Elizabeth, what you kind of brought up was the kind of the full package of Colorado, right? Colorado is exceedingly appealing. If you're raising a family and you want to be engaged in the outdoors and have access to kind of our amazing kind of I-70 corridor with all the rest of the traffic that everybody sits in on a weekend by weekend basis. So there are some nice perks to Colorado. I have, as an example, I was talking to an engineer here not too long ago, and I was trying to do a sales pitch for a role that was in Houston. And I said, the location of the job, and the gentleman said, whoop, 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 let me stop you there. Texas. Do you see Texas on my resume anywhere? I'm like, now that you brought it up, no, I don't. And he goes, there is a reason. I'm not leaving the state of Colorado to go back to Texas. And I'm like, okay. So I think that there is a inherent kind of value add that we have. I do think we run the risk with the housing prices and things along those lines on kind of making that a little bit less appealing. But we also have amazing people and resources, and our industry is diverse. So now we live in a world with dual income families, and so you need to appeal not only to the person that's actively involved in the oil and gas industry, you also need to have a nice bonus add for that second parent or that second individual to have access to a job too. So that's one nice thing that Colorado has, comparing it to kind of Oklahoma and Texas and North Dakota. So,
Rich, as an employer, do you feel pressure that you have to fight and not fight, but compete on compensation? And have you found yourself in a situation where you've been able to offset compensation by culture or benefits or personal time off, or, and then I want to ask, what are you most proud of at Great West as far as what you're willing to offer employees?
We participate in salary surveys, so we've got all the traditional data. But actually, our job openings are, we receive applicants from all over the country. It's not just Denver anymore. So we spend a lot of time filtering through the applicants. There's a lot of people looking for jobs and a lot of people who want to come to Colorado from out of state. We offer a competitive salary. We offer some flexibility on hours. I think we offer a package that's comparable to any company in the city. But I think our best form of advertising is our existing employees. So our richest source of finding new employees are word of mouth from people that already work at Great Western, and they have a friend who's a landman or an engineer, an accountant, and they say, well, we've got an opening. Yeah. And that's really where we get a large number of our applicants.
Well, this will tie into a question from our audience. How important is the ability to work from home in recruiting talent? And why are oil and gas companies not doing it? And why aren't oil and gas companies doing it?
Is that for me?
Let's let you start.
We don't let anybody work from home. It's just not the nature. Again, it goes back to having a successful team and being part of a team organization, and we have multidisciplines, so you've got to be there in order to have that interaction. We've made flexibility under special circumstances where we've had people that had extended illnesses that they were still competent, but they couldn't really come to office. So we've made a modification for them. But generally, we think it's critical to have people interacting with their peers. And again, expanding that mentorship program, interacting with the different generations. so we can get that transfer of knowledge to the new staffs.
Kaylee, do you find that with your candidate base? They want to work from home?
I do. I mean, I think that Great Western might have a different kind of approach. A lot of companies that we work with, a lot of our clients, are finding themselves utilizing the flexibility component as a way to get the talent that they're looking for, to kind of get that leg up. I think, I'd mentioned dual income housing, or dual income in the family, both working, managing that with child requirements. There's a lot of kind of leg room that flexibility allows for retention on employees. It makes them a lot harder for somebody like me to come poach when you kind of allow a little bit more flexibility. I think, Elizabeth, you said, compensation's number one. I often kind of disagree with that. In most of the conversations that I have with candidates, it tends to not be their number one target. Yes, the pay is important, but it's the full package of kind of the experience, not so much the healthcare benefits and things like that, but the package of the experience. And so I think if you can have flexibility from work from home on 2 days or 1 day a week or a 980 schedule, oh my goodness, trying to take somebody from 980 schedule back to Monday through Friday is really difficult once you've kind of gotten that taste. So I think with that change, you're going to see people come up with a little bit more creative ways to manage their workforce.
So Elizabeth, we're backing it up again. This time we're going to talk about educational. If we are attracting a millennial generation, which is, right now, statistics say 22 to 37, with a higher educational attainment, do you see that Colorado can continue to attract that and maintain the type of job growth in the industry sectors, not only in oil and gas, but extraction in the mining industry or in technology or food services? Surprisingly, a lot of people don't realize how large Colorado is in the food services industry. We have a number of big food service companies. Can you talk about that migration rate of the very well educated to the state and how that is impacting employers or impacting the migrants coming to our state because of the lack of high paying jobs required with higher educations?
Right. Well, so across the board, migrants tend to have higher educational attainment. So when you're attracting people to the state, just in essence, they typically have a higher educational attainment because they see opportunity, and if you don't, it's really hard to move. Mobility is really constrained by education. Again, I think Colorado's done really well in terms of attracting higher educational attainment. A lot of it is primarily because we don't produce enough in-state ourselves. If we produced more in-state, I think we'd not require as many migrants to the state. I think it's a risk that we have in the future is if we will continue to be able to attract and retain enough talent for the firms that we are creating. Colorado's been in the top 4, 5 in terms of job growth in the United States for like 6 years in a row. We are really doing phenomenally in terms of job growth. It's really talent attraction, I think, that is our biggest constraint, and most people are able to get a right fit for the right position. But sometimes, you maybe have been studying a certain industry and that's not something that's really strong in Colorado. Like manufacturing is not a really strong industry, and so if that has been your area, then maybe you do end up needing to move out of state to find your right position. But we've been doing pretty well.
So Kaylee, with that in mind, where are you seeing the growth of hiring in the industry? Upstream, midstream? Of course, we don't have much here in Colorado in the downstream other than Suncor. So where are you seeing an uptick in hiring? And are we seeing an uptick in hiring that is moving from full-time employment to contract labor?
I think anybody who's kind of ridden through a variety of kind of downturn. So in like '08, what we saw from like a staffing perspective was we did see that. We saw a lot of, kind of a lot fewer full-time opportunities, direct hires with employers, a lot more opportunity to work with those companies in a contracted fashion. I think you're starting to see that door swing again on that front. I think one of the big areas that we see a lot of need, I think if we're talking through like skills gaps and where hard to find jobs and new, hard to find roles to fill in the industry, they tend to be not only kind of in the corporate level roles, I know we talk a lot about that in these types of forums, but a lot of the hands-on kind of operational field level personnel. It takes those individuals to keep our industry going, and those are the toughest ones to find right now. We're talking trades, hands-on, whether or not you're talking a cryogenic plant operator or what. Those are the individuals that we're seeing an uptick in need and a really, really limited labor pool to work from right now. So I don't know if I answered your question per se,
Yes,
but
I think so. Just for clarification, so it's not just traditional upstream positions that you're seeing.
Correct.
You're seeing in other areas in the midstream sector or services sector, specifically into the industries.
Correct. I think like we tend to think, when we think of upstream and midstream, we think traditionally with the producers and the midstream companies. What we forget is there's an entire ecosystem where the personnel kind of flows freely, right? Between the consulting groups and the EPC firms and everybody that helps the kind of the machine keep operating. Those are also who has the upcoming jobs. You're seeing a lot more availability in jobs in outside of your traditional kind of producer roles in the marketplace.
Rich?
So Elizabeth mentioned we don't have a very big manufacturing base here in Colorado, but I would say that the way we're drilling wells right now is like a factory. It's become to such a level where it has become so efficient, and it's where we're drilling these multi-well paths. It's just like an assembly line almost, and you need to have every member in that assembly line communicating and coordinating in order to drive the efficiencies that we're getting. The other thing about full-time versus part-time, as we've evolved and absorbed this big data and this digitization of the oil field, it's requiring new skill sets. We're hiring computer programmers to automate more and more of our operations. And those tend to be more short-lived jobs, right? Because we get the software in place, then we train the operators. We don't need this big group of programmers. Once we have the programs in place, then the operators just drive the software. So that's kind of where we're seeing some of the short-term employees. And in Colorado, in our regulatory environment, it's gotten so complex. That's been the growth area for our company, is just compliance and permitting, to the point where the process has gotten so rigorous and so meticulous. I've had to hire proofreaders for my permits because they're getting rejected over the smallest little items that are in our permits. Our permits are stacks of paper this thick, and the people who work on them, sometimes things slip by them. So I have to have a proofreader come through and make sure that everything is absolutely meticulous. Otherwise, it gets kicked right back to us and we start the whole process over, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but that's the world we live in today.
Okay, Rich, we have just 3 minutes. And I'm going to ask you if you could share with our audience, what would you have told yourself? Can you look back? What would you tell yourself now when you entered the workforce 35 years ago? What have you learned? What wonderful nuggets of experience can you share with us that we can walk away with?
That's a good question. I've had the fortunate opportunity to work with our Koga engine class and speak to some of our brilliant young members of our industry. And I tell them one thing, to always be an ACE. And the ACE stands for attention to detail, constant learning, and enthusiasm. And if you do those three things, you'll be successful in our industry. And I think it's important. We're constantly learning. You constantly have to stay up on top of things. And I think it's very helpful, again, like the engine program prepares people, is to understand the full spectrum from the business side to the technical side to the financial side. I think that's the key. And that's what I would tell my younger self.
Your younger self.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I don't think we have any more questions from the audience, but I want to sincerely appreciate everyone's attendance today, and I do hope we were insightful in allowing you to understand that this industry is engaged and cares deeply about its most valuable assets, its people, and it will continue to evolve, and it will continue to meet the demands, no matter what geopolitical, automation, technology-driven challenges we have. We have stepped up year after year, century after century, and I appreciate your attendance. Thank you.